Hi everyone, welcome back. In the last video we created this Adobe Illustrator file with a little basic logo. In this video we're going to import the file into Maya and create a 3D logo from it. So basically now that we're in Maya, the first thing I'm going to do is create a new project folder. So it's important that you do this with each project you work on. So I'm just going to go to File, Project Window, hit the new button, and I'm actually going to I've already got this kind of folder full of stuff that I'm working on, so I'm actually going to rename it the same as this. So I'm just going to select oops, let me just get back to there. I'm just going to copy and paste that folder just for my usage, and just pop that in there. And I'm going to just set a location for it as well. So I've just got to go back through my folders. Here we go. I'll select that. So what will happen is it'll basically overwrite the existing folder. It won't remove any files that are already in there. It'll just add these new folders into that folder. So I'll just hit accept, and here we go. There's the folder. Okay, you can see it's still there, but if I go into it, it's got my existing folders such as my reference folder. It's got my original files in there as well, but it's added all the other folders plus the Maya workspace script file. So you can see there you can actually use existing folders and kind of turn them into Maya project folders as well. So I can kind of go into there. All right. So the software now should be looking at this set of folders. Now I've got this reference folder and I've put stuff in there. If you wanted to import that file using the usual Maya menus, what we would do is go to File, Import, and you can see there it's going to go to the Scenes file or Scenes folder. So technically, if you move your Illustrator file into the Scenes folder, you would find that it would appear there. There's a couple of different ways we can actually do this in Maya though. So I'm just going to move that into the Scenes folder, and I'll show you kind of a couple of different ways you can do this. So you can see it's appearing up here now in the Scenes folder. So I'll just hit that and hit open, and you can see that it's brought that in as a curve. All right, it's just a set of curves. And you can see the difference between these two. I wanted to show you this difference. This bottom one is the object I set up using the Pathfinder tool. So I cut this piece out between the square and the circle. So what that's resulted in is one curve in this shape and a separate curve in this shape. Where I just overlaid the two, or overlapped the two shapes, what I've got is a full circle and a full square. Even though both of these two objects look exactly the same, they're actually different, and it'll give you a different result. Down here on the curves, you can see that things like a P, where they've got an opening in the middle of any letters, will actually be two separate curves. Likewise with any things like a letter I, the dot will be separate to the actual main body of the letter, just here. So the G's are separate and the A's are separate as well. So just keep that in mind. It will give you completely separated curves. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. All right, the other way of doing it, if I just delete this, the other way you can do it is actually you can just take the file itself and drag it directly into the viewport, and that will also import it. That technically works with 3D objects as well. You can kind of drag them into your scenes, but oftentimes it's maybe not the best practice per se. Okay, so let's start to create a model out of this. The first thing I want to do is get this whole thing into the middle of the grid. It's usually a lot better to kind of have things up here. So what I'm going to do is take all my curves just like that, and I'm going to group them. Now you'll notice by default that every single curve has its pivot point in the middle of the grid. Okay. Now that basically this position here, when we're looking at it like this position just here is actually, if I can get Illustrator back up, it's basically the top upper left corner of the document. So if you've got like an A4 document and your logo is really small and it's down here, what will happen is you'll end up with a tiny little logo down here, or it would actually be probably down here somewhere. So just bear that in mind. The upper left corner is actually where the middle of the grid is, so your logo generally ends up sort of below the grid like this. Right, so each piece has its pivot point up here. What we want to do is take everything, group it, so we'll go Edit Group, just down here, Control G. All right, now the group's pivot point will also be in the middle of the grid, but now we're dealing with one pivot point which will move everything together. So what we want to do is get this pivot point into the middle of our logo. So what we do is go Modify Center Pivot, just here, and that'll move it down into here. So this is the group pivot point, not any pivot point from any of these other objects. All right, you can turn Snap to Grids on, just up here, or hold down the X key to toggle that, and then just grab the move handle in the middle and drag it to the middle of your grid, and that'll just position it there. Okay, so once that's positioned in the middle of the grid, just make sure you turn off your grid snap at the top. What we want to do is freeze the transformations on this. That'll zero out these values, so we'll go Modify, Freeze Transformations. Okay. Then what I want to do is make sure that every single object that we've got in here also has its transformation centered, just to kind of be neat about it, because you'll notice that, you know, they've all moved up to here now. So I'll just select everything like that, and what we want to do is remove it from the group to begin with. So what I'm going to do is come up to Edit, and we would probably be right in thinking that Ungroup is going to actually remove the these objects from the group. It doesn't, because we've got these selected and not the group. If we go to Unparent, that will actually remove them from the group. I'll show you what I'm talking about. If I pop open the outliner for a second, you'll notice that we've got this group just here, and what we have selected is all those objects. Now, if you go to Edit Ungroup, you'll get this error message. Okay. What I tend to do is just go Edit Unparent, and it will remove them out of the group. So items inside a group are parented to that group. That's how they're actually connected. Okay. The ungroup value you could probably use if you had the group selected. Let's just have a quick go at that. So if I select the group and go Edit Ungroup, you'll see that it ungroups them. You'll also notice that the group node object disappears. It gets removed from the scene. So the outcome's the same. It's a subtle difference though. It'll remove that extra group. Either way, basically everything is now separated again. So what we'll do is center the pivot point. So we'll go Modify Center Pivot just to neaten things out. So now every single piece has its own pivot point at its own center, whether it's one of the letters or one of the shapes. Okay. We can turn off the outliner again. That's fine. So now comes the point where we actually start to create our 3D objects. Now at this point it's going to be quite repetitive. We need to work out a few settings first using trial and error. Once we've kind of worked out what settings we want, we then basically repeat the tool or the process over and over again for each piece of our logo. I'm going to turn the grid off for this because I don't really need it. Okay, so I'm going to start off, I think, maybe with these top pieces just up here, so you can kind of get a rough idea on a basic object. So the tool that we want to use is called Bevel Plus. Now the Bevel Plus tool actually works on curves, which are what these objects are. So it's not found in the polygon shelf just here. It's actually found in the surfaces shelf just here. Now I know I said it works on curves, and we've got a curve tab just here. This tab basically allows us to edit or create curves. It doesn't create new geometry or new objects from the curves in this tab. That's what the Surfaces tab is for. The Bevel Plus tool is just here. It's this little kind of, looks like a little chop or something with a plus next to it. Okay, so this is what we're going to be using. If you come up and set your menu set to Surfaces, just here, you will also find the Bevel Plus tool under Surfaces, Bevel Plus, just down here. Okay, so what we're going to do is open the options for that tool, and this is the control panel for it. So the first thing I'll do is go to Edit, Reset Settings. Usually it's a pretty good idea to do that, especially on a shared computer, in case somebody's been using a really crazy setting for a tool. Okay, so these are the default settings. I'm just going to apply this to show you what it does by default. Okay, so I'll just press Apply. So you can see what it's doing is basically extruding the curve out, and it's also creating a bevel on the front and on the back. So the bevel is this little edge just here, the little angle. All right, so what we need to do is work out the best settings. Now note that it's actually extruded this out backwards. So it started at the curve and went backwards. Generally speaking, what we would want to do is have it coming forwards. And if you apply that to maybe something else, okay, that one's gone backwards as well, you might find a mix of objects, see there? So these ones have gone backwards, this one's gone forwards. Now what you would do in that situation, okay, is you take your curve, okay, that you've used. Okay, so I'll just select that curve, make sure I don't have any polygons selected. And if you come up to Edit Curves and down to Reverse Curve Direction, it'll actually flip the curve around the other direction, and that will make your extrusion pop out towards the front of the curves instead of the back. So let's just grab, what I might do is actually add that to the shelf. So if I go to Edit Curves, hold down Shift and Control, and click on Reverse Curve Direction, just there, it'll add it into my Surfaces shelf. Now it is also in the curve shelf. I've got it added just there. So I've added it to both to speed up work. Alright, so I can just reverse that round. So having that handy while you're kind of experimenting with your settings is fine. Alright, so let's take a look at what some of these settings do. So create bevel, just here at the top, these two, will actually create, let me just delete those so we can see. If I turn create bevel off at end and hit apply, note that it will only bevel the back. So the start point is where the curve is. The end point is the end of where it extrudes to, whether it's going forwards or backwards. Okay, so you can see here you can actually have just a flat surface. You don't have to have these little beveled edges. Okay, at start obviously does it the other way around. The bevel width and depth, okay, that's basically the size of the bevel. So for example, if I set this to 0.5 and I bevel that, you can see I get a much bigger bevel. All right. Now also notice that at the moment the bevel starts at the curve and goes out, so it's actually making my object much bigger. All right, much bigger than what I would want it. We're going to check that out in a second. The extrude distance is how far from the curve it extends. So if I have an extrude distance of let's say 0.25, let me just reset these back down to 0.2. Oops. Okay, so if I've got a default of 0.25, it gives me a bevel like that, or an extrusion distance of that. If I increase it, obviously we're going to get a deeper bevel. So if I go 0.5, it will extrude out like that and go a bit further. Now note, in this case, all right, that's 0.25 and that's 0.5. But that's not twice the thickness of that, okay, in regards to the bevel. The actual extra bevel on this is added. This particular distance here, the extrude distance, is how far the flat bit is extruded out before it adds this on. All right. So you can see here, this distance here, from the midline to here, is about the same distance. So it is actually the same distance as that. So this has got two or twice the width as that. Okay, even though it doesn't look it. Okay, so that's how that works. Create cap at start and at end. Okay, what that does is it actually is this kind of front or back polygon. So if I extrude this but I turn off the at end option, basically I get a back polygon but no front polygon. So that's now open. Okay. The outer bevel style and the inner bevel style, they'll remain the same as one another when this is ticked, which obviously it is. What this does basically is changes how the bevel occurs. So, for example, straight out will give you that bevel. If you go straight in, it'll push in like that. Okay. If I go concave out, for example, what that'll do is create this kind of scooped out bevel. If you go concave in, all right, it does the same thing like a rounded edge, but it pushes in instead. So you can try out different bevel styles and find something that you might like. Okay, generally though, for a lot of basic logos, you tend to go with the straight out version because that'll give you the nice straight bevels. So basically what you need to do is work out your bevel width and your distance, bevel width and depth I should say, and set those up. Now there are a couple of other settings we need to be aware of, and I'm going to do that and actually start creating the bevel. The other options we need to be aware of are on the output options, okay? Generally speaking, what we would want to do is probably use polygons, okay? If you need to be doing any modifications or additional modeling to the logo, then they need to be in polygons. The sampling controls are what we also need to be aware of, and I'll show you what they do. So I'm just going to create a bevel like that. Now, the along extrusion section samples controls how many segments you get just here. And by default it's set to 2, so you always get this midline. If you don't want that, what you can do is actually set it to 1. So I'm going to set that to 1, and I'll just delete that and redo it. You can see now I just get a single polygon. Makes it a little bit easier to sort out sometimes, so that's an option. Now the spans along curve just here, those samples, I'm going to move this across just so we can actually compare this next one. Alright, I'm going to increase that to 15 and I'll redo using everything else is set the same except for those spans. Alright, now this, you can see there, has more segments in it than this. Alright, this one's just got those ones like that. This one has a whole lot more, so this one is smoother, you'll notice. Okay, so what you need to do is balance how many samples you need so that you get a nice curve. You don't want to have too many because sometimes, depending on the object, it can actually cause errors. So for example, let's try this P. We might get some errors here. Now I'm going to reduce my scale for my bevels and so on because this needs to be much smaller. So I'm going to set that to 0.05. And this is just a ballpark figure. I'm just kind of looking at the size of this compared to the size of that object. The extrude distance doesn't matter. Alright, so I'm going to set it up with the default of 6, which I had before, and I'll just apply that. Now you'll note that it's going backwards again, so that's the curve direction. So I'm just going to select both of those curves and flip them, just so we're looking at the front. Now that extrusion has come out very nicely, okay? That's not too bad. But let's just move that aside for a second. If I set this value to high, so let's say I set that to 15 and apply that. Okay, that's worked as well. That's worked fine as well. What you might find on occasion is these massive kind of artifacts. Sometimes these holes fill in too much, so on and so forth. What we can actually do, there's one way I can force it. Let's change that to a value of, let's go with maybe a value of 0.5. I'll kind of reset this back to 0.5, see if this will do it. There we go. So if your extrusion, your bevel and width value here is too big, it'll do that. Okay, you'll get this big scrambled up mess. The same thing can happen if this span samples number is too high. So you have to kind of adjust back and forth until you're happy. And just do it sort of with one letter, okay? And the letter should be curved when you're testing it, okay? Now on the straight letters, all right, so for the curved letter here, as a version of a sample value, I should say, of 6 was okay. On these letters, just here, they're all straight lines, so we don't need any additional edges added in. So we can actually drop that down to 1. Now I need to make sure that I reduce these again, because otherwise I'll get the same overlapping problem. But if I set that value to 1 and apply that, I just get 1 polygon per side. And for a straight edge letter, that's all I need. It's only when you've got a curve on your letter that you need a higher number. So, for example, if we take this E, for example, if I hit apply there, you can see what I get is a very, very clunky letter. All right, if I increase that to the default, which is 6, and apply that, here we go. You can see now I'm getting this overlapping occurring. And that's because the bevel is slightly too big, because these are very, very thin letters. Okay, so what we can do there, I'm just using undo as well, by the way. You just kind of click here in the viewport border and just use edit undo. It should be pretty obvious that's sort of what I'm doing at the moment, but yeah, just to mention it. So in that situation, I'd need to drop this down a little bit more. So, you know, I might go like 0.03, for example, 0.03. And then apply that. You can see now I'm getting this nice bevel. Okay, so what you do is you work out sort of the numbers that you need on one letter. Once you got it nice, then you do all the other letters which are similar or have similar curves. So in this case, that E is working okay. So what I'm going to do is now apply this bevel setting to all the other numbers, or all the other letters, I should say, that have curves on them that are this size. So I'm going to do it on the N, and you can see there I'm getting this issue here. All right, so that's one of those artifacts. So that might actually be a case of the span samples need to be adjusted. So if I go up to maybe 9 and apply that, you can see that's still happening. We can maybe drop it down to 5. All right, you basically got to go back and forth until you're happy with it. So let's drop it even lower. Yeah, so a value of 3. Now, you know, really you should double check and make sure that you can't go any high. Basically you want the highest number is what I'm trying to say, because that's going to give you the smoothest curve. All right, so I know that 3 is as high as I can go, so I'm going to set that to 3 and apply it. And for this one I know it's 6, and I think the rest of them are probably, the M probably should be 3, so I'll apply that, that's okay. And then these ones, basically, I know I can set that back to 6, or I should be able to. Yep, that's fine. That's fine. I'm just selecting them and pressing G, and like that. Now, also keep in mind that when I'm selecting these, I'm starting on the outside and dragging in like this to select the curves. Basically, what I'm doing is selecting the outside curve and then the inside curve. Okay, they have to be in that order for it to work. Now, I'm going to set the little circle there the same, and then what I'll do is take this letter, and I know that I can drop that down to 1 because it's just straight sides, and the same with the Z. Okay, same with the Y, same with the H. Now watch what happens if you try and do multiples. If I select both of those and hit apply, I get an error message. You can only do one letter or one shape at once. Alright, so just bear that in mind. Okay, I'll do the same thing up here. Now you can see there, because I've been doing samples of one, I kind of lose the shape. So just bear that in mind. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with the positions of everything there. Let me just reset that P. So now what I would do is go through and reverse my curves so that everything is kind of sitting forward. And you'll notice that this one's kind of a bit chunky. You'll notice that the inside curve there is not very nice. So if you need to edit any of these, let me just get rid of that. If you need to edit any of these to make them a little bit more smooth, you can do that. Easiest way is to come across to the attribute editor, and what you need to do is look for the Bevel Plus tab just here, and it's got the same sample settings as we had in the options, so you can see the curve spans here. So what we can do here is increase this until we're happy with the amount of detail. Once again, if you go too high, you may end up getting artifacts, and that can happen at even low values, as we've seen. You know, sometimes a value of 2 or 3 or 4 can cause those problems. So just bear that in mind. You don't want to go too far. I would suggest probably around about there would be fine for that. I've actually got a setting of 15 for this one, so I might actually set this one up the same. 15, so it's an even number of divisions there as on this side. Okay, so I'll just quickly grab those curves and reverse them. So just here, it's actually easier to click the letter and then drag a box with Shift held down. That will reverse that part of the selection, because the curves can be very tricky to actually click on. So that's a little kind of a little cheat. So I can just reverse all of those at once and it'll bring them all forward. Now you'll notice there that we've actually got some artifacting occurring now. So what we'd have to do is jump into the samples for that and adjust it. So it'll work with a span of 3. 3's not great though, because it's going to give us a kind of a rubbishy edge. Alright, and any higher than that is not going to give us really a good finish anyway. So that might be something that we need to fix later on. Okay, but it's not too bad as it is at a basic level. Okay. So this has been quite a long video. I'm going to leave this here, but you can basically see that's how you get essentially your 3D objects extruded. Once again, don't forget, in the Bevel Plus tab, you can go in and adjust things like the Extrude Distance. Technically, you could even animate that potentially. Yes, we can set keys for that Extrude Distance. So when we're actually doing our animation, you know, we can kind of create those kind of movements, and we can actually type in higher values than the slider allows. So we could actually create, you know, sort of towers like this, what look like towers, and then we can rotate things around and kind of have them shrink back down into a logo. So different ideas for possible animations. All right, we'll leave this here, and I'll see you in the next video, and we'll start looking at different animations.